In a quiet town, gently caressed by time, sunlight streams through the windows of an old classroom, scattering across the aged wooden floor. The air is filled with a faint, scholarly atmosphere, mixed with the fragrance of the soil from the garden outside the window. Teacher Chen, an elderly person with gray hair and a kind face, is standing on the podium. His voice is like vintage wine, mellow and full of wisdom. He gently pushed up the reading glasses on his nose, his gaze sweeping across the young and curious faces in the classroom. Classmates, today we are going to explore a grand and profound question. What truly makes a country strong? Teacher Chen's voice wasn't loud, but it carried a kind of unquestionable guiding force. He looked forward to the students' answers, knowing that this was not just a historical question, but also an enlightenment about values and worldviews. The classroom was silent at first. Then whispers began to rise. Xiaoji, the most active and straightforward student in the class, was the first to raise his hand and speak, his tone carrying the unique confidence and unruliness of a young man. Teacher, is there even a need to ask? Of course, it's money. With strong economic strength, the country has the money to build the best weapons, buy the best technology, and the people live prosperous lives, so naturally it becomes strong. As he spoke, he glanced triumphantly at the surrounding classmates, as if he felt his answer was impeccable. Lily, a girl who always liked to think deeply, frowned slightly and added, Xiaoji is right. Economics is indeed very important, but I think military strength is also essential. If there isn't a strong military to protect it, even if you have a lot of money, it could be taken away by others. Therefore, a strong military is the cornerstone of national security. Although her words were gentle, they also revealed a firm logic. Other students chimed in, some mentioning technological innovation, others emphasizing abundant resources, and some even jokingly saying, is it because they have McDonald's in Hollywood? The classroom was filled with various voices, but without exception, they all attributed the strength of the country to obvious hard power factors, such as material wealth, military power, or cultural output. Teacher Chen listened quietly, with no trace of blame on her face, only a faint, slightly melancholic smile. He understood that what these children were saying was the most direct understanding of powerful in modern society. However, true strength goes far beyond that. It's more like an iceberg, with only a few parts floating on the surface, while what's hidden beneath the water is its true, vast, and indestructible foundation. A strong sense of mission surged in his heart. He must guide these children to explore the forgotten, deeper truth. You all make very good points, Teacher Chen said slowly, his voice carrying a hint of captivating magnetism. Economy, military, technology, these are, indeed, important indicators for measuring a country's strength. But what if I told you that behind these visible strengths, there is an invisible and intangible force that is even more fundamental? Would you believe it? The students looked at each other, their eyes full of confusion. The invisible power? What is that? Teacher Chen didn't answer directly. He turned and walked towards an old wooden box covered in dust in the corner of the classroom. That wooden box looks quite old, with worn edges and a verdigris-covered brass lock, as if it holds the secrets of countless years. He carefully opened the wooden box and took out an object wrapped in yellowed silk from inside. As he gently unveiled the silk, an ancient parchment appeared before the students. The parchment has been eroded by time and is somewhat fragile, with slightly curled edges. It is covered in dense writing in an elegant and ancient font. Although the ink is somewhat faded, it is still clearly legible. This is a forgotten document. Mr. Chen's voice became low and solemn. It is not an official declaration, nor is it a military order. It is a group of ordinary people who, more than 200 years ago, made a commitment to freedom, dreams, and never giving up. It records their initial aspirations, their struggles in the face of adversity, and how they laid the foundation for this land with faith and sweat. He slowly unfurled the parchment, carefully smoothing it out on the podium. The students gathered around curiously, craning their necks, trying to see the contents clearly. On the parchment, flowing between the lines, is not just text, but a legacy of spirit. Teacher Chen began to read softly, his voice seeming to travel through time and space, bringing those ancient vows to the modern classroom. We believe that every individual, regardless of their origin, skin color, or belief, should have the right to pursue happiness, and this right should not be deprived by any power. We pledge to strive for building an inclusive society where different voices converge and diverse cultures blend, because we deeply understand that true strength comes from the integration of differences rather than the uniformity of a single entity. He read a passage about exploration and innovation. We are not afraid of the unknown, and we are not satisfied with the status quo. We aspire to explore the mysteries of nature and challenge the limits of humanity. We believe that knowledge is the torch that illuminates the way forward, and innovation is the engine that drives civilization forward. Even when faced with failure, we will learn from it and never stop pursuing truth and progress. Then, he read a passage about resilience and hope. When darkness falls, and when hope seems dim, we will hold each other's hands tightly and resist the storm with a tenacious will. We will rebuild our homes in the ruins and ignite hope in despair, because we know that the soul of a nation lies not in never falling, but in being able to rise again after each fall and move forward with greater determination. There are also some hand-drawn stick figures on the parchment, scenes of pioneers reclaiming rugged land, pictures of people of different skin colors sitting together sharing food, and even some simple but imaginative mechanical sketches. These pictures and words complement each other, jointly outlining an era full of ideals and struggles. The students held their breath, as if drawn in by an invisible force. They saw countless miniatures of people striving for their ideals. Those simple and sincere words, like a beam of light, pierced through the dust of history and illuminated their hearts. The classroom was so quiet that only Mr. Chen's deep voice and the occasional rustling of paper could be heard. The bell rang suddenly, breaking the silence. However, not a single student stood up. They remained immersed in the world depicted by the parchment. Xiaoji frowned, touched by the words, but his inherent rationality made him question. Teacher, these words are indeed moving, but they are, after all, from more than 200 years ago. Does it really represent the United States today? And this parchment, is it really real? Could it be fabricated by later generations to beautify history? His tone carried a hint of challenge, along with the young man's persistence for the truth. Lily then asked softly, Teacher, if these ideals are really so important, why haven't we ever heard of this document before? Why was it forgotten in an old wooden box? Her question touched on a deeper level of doubt. Teacher Chen anticipated these problems. He knew that a single document would not be enough to truly help these children understand. He must prove its authenticity, and more importantly, prove how the spirit it carries has been constantly inherited and tested throughout the long river of history, ultimately shaping the country today. This is not just a history lesson, but a journey about belief and verification. You guys raised excellent questions. Teacher Chen's gaze was firm, yet gentle. History is never a single narrative. It is full of complexity, forgetting, and reshaping. The reason this document was forgotten may be because it represents the more simple and grassroots voices. They are not as carefully preserved as official documents, but they are an indispensable part of the national spirit. He gently stroked the parchment and continued, As for its authenticity, I understand your doubts. The truth of history needs verification and evidence. So, In the next few weeks, we will embark on a journey of exploration together. We must not only verify the authenticity of this document, but also trace how the promises it carries have been practiced and challenged time and time again in the historical process of the United States, and ultimately become the true gene of this country. In the following weeks, Mr. Chen's history class became more vivid and challenging than ever before. He didn't give the answer directly, but guided the students to find it themselves. He first led them to visit the town's historical archives. There are many yellowed old newspapers, local chronicles, and family letters preserved there. Teacher Chen taught them how to identify the age of paper, the composition of ink, and the style of handwriting. He encouraged the students to compare the content on the parchment with the materials in the archives. At first, Xiaoji remained skeptical. He carefully examined the edges of the parchment, even using a magnifying glass to observe the fibers on it. However, when he found an article in a mid-19th century local newspaper about the town's early immigrant community, which mentioned a pioneer named Elias, whose diary described a desire for freedom and inclusion, similar to that on the parchment, little Jay's eyes began to waver. Even more coincidentally, a description of an early town market mentioned in Elias's diary almost perfectly matches a sketch on the parchment. Lily, while researching a document about the women's suffrage movement, discovered that many of the demands made by early feminists echoed the promise of equal rights in the parchment. She realized that these seemingly abstract ideals were not just on the surface of the words, but the driving force that inspired generations to fight for them. Teacher Chen also invited a retired historian, who is also an expert in ancient document authentication, to the classroom. This old professor brought professional appraisal tools. He carefully examined the parchment's material, ink composition, and font style, and rigorously compared it with other known contemporary documents. Finally, he gave an authoritative conclusion. This parchment, whether from the material, ink, or writing style, is highly consistent with the characteristics of documents from the late 18th to early 19th century. Although it may not be from a famous person, it is indeed a real, private record from that era, reflecting the common aspirations and ideals of ordinary people at that time. This conclusion, like a reassuring pill, dispelled the students' doubts. They no longer doubted the authenticity of the parchment, but began to ponder the meaning it held. Taking advantage of the momentum, Mr. Chen shifted the focus of the course from document authentication to the fulfillment and challenges of commitments. He led the students to review several key turning points in American history: the Civil War, the Great Depression, the Civil Rights Movement, and the two World Wars. He guides the students to think about how the promises of freedom, equality, resilience, and innovation are repeatedly tested, redefined, and defended in these major events that seem unrelated to parchment. The Civil War was to defend the promise of all men are created equal. The Great Depression was to test the resilience of common struggle, never give up. The Civil Rights Movement was to realize the ideal of diversity and inclusion, eliminating discrimination. And every leap in technology is the embodiment of the spirit of exploring the unknown and challenging the limits. Mr. Chen's voice was full of power as he closely linked the abstract words on the parchment with vivid historical events, allowing students to see that those forgotten promises had never truly disappeared. They simply inspired people to move forward in different forms and in different eras. Xiao Jie's eyes changed. He was no longer the boy who only valued material things and military power. He began to understand that the strength of a country lies not only in how much wealth and weapons it possesses, but more in whether its people share common beliefs and are willing to fight for those beliefs. He even offered to translate parts of the parchment into modern language and create a booklet to share with more people. Lily thought even more deeply. She realized that the complexity of history lies in the fact that these beautiful promises are not achieved overnight, nor are they without controversy. In the course of history, there will always be deviations, struggles, and compromises. But it is precisely these constant corrections and efforts that make these promises more solid and meaningful. She began writing a paper on how forgotten promises shape the modern American spirit, attempting to explain the profound impact of this document from a broader perspective. Meanwhile, Xiao Ming, who had been silent all along, drew many meaningful pictures in his classroom notebook. He drew a large, deeply rooted tree with parchment text carved into its trunk, and its canopy stretched towards the sky, bearing the fruits of modern technology. He expressed his understanding of this invisible force in his own way. In the last class of the course, Teacher Chen didn't lecture on history anymore, but instead had the students share their xinde. Xinde is a Chinese word. It means gains from learning. The atmosphere in the classroom was warm and sincere. The students vied to speak, no longer just talking about economics and military affairs, but mentioning civic responsibility, social justice, cultural diversity, the spirit of innovation, and resilience in the face of difficulties. Teacher, I understand now. Xiao Jie stood up, his tone filled with unprecedented respect. The true strength of a country comes from the hearts of its people. It is their desire for freedom, their pursuit of equality, their confidence in the future, and their spirit of never giving up in the face of adversity. These unseen things are the most indestructible forces, Lily added. Moreover, these promises are not static. They need to be understood, passed down, and continuously improved by generations. The complexity of history lies in the fact that we are always striving to make these ideals a reality. Teacher Chen looked at the children with satisfaction. In their eyes, there is a glimmer of wisdom, no longer the initial bewilderment and simplicity. He knew that this forgotten truth had planted in the children's hearts a more comprehensive and profound understanding of the power of the state. He gently closed the parchment and placed it back into the old wooden box. Although this document is old, the spirit it carries has sparked new vitality in these young minds. Yes, students. Miss Chen's voice was full of warmth and strength. True strength is never singular. It is a combination of many factors. It has both a solid material foundation and a profound spiritual heritage. And the complexity of history is precisely what makes it so fascinating. It tells us that a country, a nation, and even each of us must constantly learn, reflect, and grow in order to truly understand and create our own strength. The afterglow of the setting sun shone through the window, bathing the classroom in a golden light. The students left one after another, but their footsteps were firmer than before. They walked out of the classroom and into the wider world, carrying with them a reverence for history, a consideration for the future, and a deeper understanding of strength. And Teacher Chen stood quietly in front of the podium, looking out the window, his eyes gleaming with a firm belief in hope and inheritance. He knew that this forgotten promise had found a new inheritor in the new era, and it would continue to inspire people to create a better and stronger future.